Hi everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us here on this really cool breezy day in April. My name is Dr. Dan Mathew. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I teach an animal anatomy and physiology course, ANSC 220. And today I'd like to share with you some of the really interesting anatomical structures and physiological aspects of the animal. Unfortunately, we had a young calf passed away as a Holstein calf, but the local farmer donated this calf to us to share with you today. So I'd like to just walk you through some of the really interesting anatomical structures and talk a little bit about the physiology of the animal. Well, we had a break in the wind, and the sun has opened up here for us, the clouds have opened up here for us, so I just want to take a minute to introduce Charlie. Charlie is a black lab pit bull mix that was rescued from a pit bull rescue shelter in Missouri, and she's going to kind of help us with our directional terminology, anatomy directional terminology. Okay, Charlie, come on, stand up. Come on, stand up. Okay, come here, Charlie. Okay, so if we were to separate Charlie in a half this direction, if we maybe draw a plane this way, a transverse plane, we would then separate Charlie into two halves. This region towards the back here would be called the caudal region, or this direction would be called the caudal direction, and this direction here would be called the cranial direction, or cranial region. So if we might refer to something as being, let's say maybe we talk about Charlie's heart, we would say Charlie's heart is more cranial to her rump or her tail. And then also we might say her tail is more caudal to her heart. At the same time, if we were to maybe draw a line this direction through Charlie, all the way across here, we can then separate Charlie into these two halves. This region here, more towards the vertebrae, Charlie's vertebrae along the back, would be considered to be the dorsal region. And this down this direction here would be more ventral region. One other line, if we drew a line this direction through Charlie, right through her nose, all the way down like this direction, and we would separate Charlie into two equal halves, we would say structures that are more towards the median line, that line down the middle, as being more medial. And things that are a little further away from that might be a little more lateral. For instance, we would say that Charlie's heart is more medial than her, let's say her thoracic limbs, her two front limbs. And her thoracic limbs are more lateral compared to her heart, which is right more towards the center. Another thing I want to mention about Charlie is that she has really sharp canine teeth. And that's for her to help her eat meat and to chew, a process called mastication. And Charlie has what's called a simple stomach, so it's really a one-chambered stomach that helps her digest that meat and those proteins. So I just want to share a few more things with you before we move on to our calf dissection. Show you a couple of skeletons that we have here. This first one is either a possum or a raccoon skull, and I kind of want to show you this because you can see that the canines here on the front are much like Charlie's. They're more for tearing their meat, tearing their food before swallowing, and they have some upper incisors here in the front. Something also kind of interesting about these skulls is the very large opening in the back, which is called the foramen magnum, and that's an entrance for the spinal cord to enter into the brainstem, and then which then enters into the brain or the skull of the animal. So what you'll notice here on this skeleton, this is actually a young male deer skull that was found in West Virginia, and I really want to show you this because this is this animal is considered to be a ruminant, like the calf I'm going to show you in a minute. It has 4 compartments in its stomach, and the stomach is designed to break down grass and use grass as a nutrient source. And it has these more flattened teeth here, these molars that are more for grinding down and smashing down that grass before swallowing it for digestion. So they don't eat meat. They're considered to be herbivores, and so they eat grass and they break down the grass and smash it with these molars. Which is also kind of interesting about this animal, as it is a young animal. You can see that these are actually baby teeth, or sometimes we call these milk teeth or decidual teeth, because you can see the more adult-like teeth coming in up the top here. They're more adult teeth that are starting to move in. And so these front molars here will eventually fall out and be replaced by these more adult or permanent teeth. So you can also see on this animal that it has, at the beginning are antlers, and antlers are different from horns. Antlers are made out of bone, and horns are made out of what our fingernails and our hair are made out of, a really strong protein called keratin. So it's a little bit different. You can see that very large foramen magnum in the back where the spinal cord enters in, becomes the brainstem and then the brain as it moves into the skull. And on top you can see what's called a suture joint. Now this is not the type of a joint that we would have in our legs and our arms. It's a little different. It has less movement in it, but it is a type of joint. And you can see how the bones are really interlaced here and why it's called a suture joint. It's really, really interesting. But as the animal gets a little bit older, these sutures become less prominent and will actually become more bone and kind of solidify over eventually as the animal reaches adulthood. So one other thing I want to mention is that ruminants here, like this young deer and like the calf we'll show you in a minute, they don't have these front upper incisors that I showed you here that this animal would have had here in the front, and so that's a little bit different also. So this animal has these incisors in the front here. Cattle and deer don't have these incisors. They actually have a really hard upper palate that allows them to press the grass up to the top of their mouth and kind of tear it off as they pull away or as they chew it. So okay, well, thanks for letting me show you this, and let's go ahead and we'll take you on over to our calf and we'll begin our dissection. Thank you. Hey guys, so what I've done here is I've dissected the calf, and I've opened up part of the neck and also the thoracic cavity. And in that thoracic cavity you'll see the lungs and the heart, and I've also opened up part of the abdominal cavity. So I'm going to show you just a few structures there, the trachea and the lungs and the heart, and then show you part of the abdominal cavity. And you can just come with me and we'll walk through this together. So what I've done here is I've opened up part of the neck and then the thoracic cavity. And so what you're actually seeing here is this is the trachea, and this is where the air will enter into to go towards the lungs. Okay, and up here top is this is the larynx, and so air and both food will enter into the pharynx, and then air will be enter into the larynx, past the vocal cords and into the trachea. You can see the trachea has these really interesting collagen rings in it. Helps to maintain its structure as air is flowing down into the lungs. And when I show you the top here, and part of this larynx is what's called the epiglottis. And the epiglottis, when the animal swallows, will actually close over top of the larynx, blocking the entrance of food going into the trachea, so that food doesn't enter into the trachea and towards the lungs. And that food will then go down into the esophagus, which is just right down through here. So we have the trachea here, and then the esophagus underneath, right here. And then food will then pass through the esophagus all the way down into the first part of the forestomach of the ruminant, called the rumen, and also the reticulum. Okay, so what I also want to show you here is that when I've opened up the rib cage here and exposed the thoracic cavity, as you can see this is actually the heart here. And the heart is maintained in what's called a pericardial space or pericardial sac. And that pericardial sac has a little bit of fluid on the inside, and it will allow the heart to beat and contract and move inside there with a little bit of fluid to help reduce the friction as the heart is beating. So what you're actually seeing there is that pericardial sac over the top of the heart. And I'll move this in a moment so you can actually see the heart. What we have here is the cranial vena cava, which is bringing blood back to the heart from the cranial part of the animal, the top part of the animal, the head and the upper limbs. And this is deoxygenated blood coming back to the heart to be then pumped to the lungs. Down here and below we have what's called the caudal vena cava coming from the lower half of the animal, also coming back to that right side of the heart to then be pumped to the lungs to be re-oxygenated to then go back to the tissues. And you can see here that we have the lungs. On the right side here we have 4 lobes. We have a cranial lobe, a lung lobe. We have a middle lobe. We have a caudal lobe, and we have what's called an accessory lobe. And on the right side we have a cranial and caudal lung lobe. So when blood enters the right side of the heart, it's going to go into the right atrium. It's going to then flow into the right ventricle, and then the heart's going to contract and push that blood into the lungs. And that's going to enter into the lungs through a pulmonary artery. Once that blood has re-oxygenated, it's going to return to the left side of the heart, and it's going to enter into the left atrium, the left ventricle. The left ventricle, a very strong part of the heart, and that's going to press blood out to the rest of the body through the aorta. And I'm just going to pull this open here so you can see part of the aorta. And this is the aorta here, coming out the top of the left side of the heart. It's then passing down through, going down here towards the lower extremities of the animal. It actually passes through the diaphragm, which is a very strong skeletal muscle layer that basically helps the animal breathe, but also helps to maintain the organs in the abdominal cavity. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and dissect the heart out for you so you can take a look at the heart and some of the different structures here. Cut through the vena cava there. We're going to cut to the top of the heart. You can see the blood clot is formed inside there. Alright, and what I've cut through here, you can see the part of the trachea that I've cut through. Let's go through a little bit further. Okay, and I'll try to remove the whole, the lungs and the heart for you. So I've just cut through the part of the aorta. You see how the aorta is very large, very stretchy artery. Lots of blood there going to the bottom half of the caudal part of the animal. And just almost got the lungs removed here. See how that aorta goes into the abdominal cavity there. And okay, so what I've also cut through here is part of the esophagus that helps food then enter into the abdominal cavity and into the rumen. Now here you can see the calf's lungs. There's the very large aorta coming off the top of the heart, sending blood throughout the animal's body, oxygenated blood. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to see that the heart is in this pericardial sac here, and I'm just going to kind of open this up so we can take a closer look at the heart. Okay, you can see the heart just comes from a very strong muscular organ that's able to pump blood either to pulmonary circulation, so to the lungs, or to systemic circulation to the body, sending oxygenated blood to the body, so to supply the different tissues with oxygen. Okay, so here are the atria, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of open up different parts of the heart here. A little blood clot. Okay. Remove the lungs. Okay, so what I've done here now is I've dissected out the heart and also the lungs for you, and I just kind of want to walk you through some different parts of the heart. And so what you have here, we did show you earlier the aorta leaving the thoracic cavity, going into the abdominal cavity through the diaphragm here. But when we look at the heart, and just kind of want to show you some different structures. Let's just start over here on the, this is going to be the right side. So as blood enters into the right side of the heart, it's going to enter into the right atrium, and it's going to be deoxygenated blood coming back to the heart from the different tissues. and it's going to flow from the atrium down through this valve called the right AV valve. And that valve is held in place by what are called chordae tendineae, these little string-like structures here. And they help to, once blood flows from the atrium into the ventricle, helps to block the backflow of blood back into the atrium. So blood will enter into this right side here, into the right ventricle, and then will be pumped to the lungs to receive oxygen again. And once that blood is reoxygenated, it's then going to enter into the left side of the heart, into the left atrium. I'm coming over here to this side now. It's going to enter into this left atrium here, and it's going to flow from the left atrium into the left ventricle through the AV valve on that side. And that left side of the heart will then contract, the very strong side of the heart, and press blood out through the aorta, going back into the tissues, oxygenated blood going back to the tissues to supply them with oxygen. And so, just show you the lungs here. So, just want to show you a little bit about the lungs a little bit. And you can see these different lobes, and I kind of showed you earlier. But inside these lobes are very small hollow structures called alveoli. And these hollow areas are where oxygen can enter into the lungs, and there can be exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between those alveoli, and so the blood can receive, and those red blood cells can receive oxygen there and exchange that with CO2. Okay, so we've dissected open the abdominal cavity, and the esophagus will then lead into the ruminant stomach, the calf stomach, and there are 4 chambers to the stomach. There's a rumen, a reticulum, an omasum, and an abomasum. And the rumen and the reticulum are able to house a number of microorganisms and bacteria that can break up plant material, particularly cellulose, for the animal to use for energy. And so I'm just going to show you the honeycomb appearance here of this is the reticulum, and some parts here of the rumen. So this is still under development because this is a young calf. So there is what's called an esophageal groove, where a groove can form leading from the esophagus straight past the rumen and the reticulum down into what's called the abomasum, which is actually the true stomach of the ruminant, and that helps to bring milk during suckling past these areas straight to the abomasum, so that the milk doesn't find its way into the reticulum and rumen, and those microbes are able to sour the milk. So it's able to actually pass through those areas to the actual true stomach of the ruminant, to the abomasum, which then feed will then move on into the small intestine. Okay, so what I'm showing you, this is the liver right here, and underneath the liver is the beginning of the small intestine. And so as food exits the abomasum, it's going to enter into the small intestine. And the small intestine has 3 major parts: the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. And there will be absorption of different parts of the digestive material through the small intestine. That's its real function, is absorption of really important things that are in that digestive material, such as amino acids and lipids and other important things, vitamins and minerals. And underneath here we have is the gallbladder, and a gallbladder contains bile in it, and that bile is produced by the liver, and that helps to break up some of the lipid that ends up into the digestive material that goes into the small intestine. The liver is also really important for many functions, but very important for storing glucose for energy, and also producing glucose for energy. So just going to show you here, we've dissected out the small intestine, and you can see it's really, really long, and so it's really important that this intestine is really long so that it has plenty of time to absorb out all the really important things that end up in the digestive material. Okay, so you can see how really long it is, and that this allows a lot of surface area for things to be reabsorbed back by the body that are really important. So the small intestine will eventually lead into the large intestine, and what you see here, this is a blind pouch called the cecum, And there are some bacteria in here that also help with fermentation of some of the digestive materials in here, but not as much as the rumen, the reticulum of the stomach, of the rumen. And then what we have here is just another piece of the large intestine, and we've actually just dissected this out here. So the large intestine is also very important for more absorption, particularly for water. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now, I'm going to dissect the kidney out for you. So we can take a look at that. The kidney is really important for filtering the blood and removing any toxins that might be in the blood, and also helps to maintain salt and water balance in the animal. And the kidneys of the cow are pretty interesting because they have these they have what look like lobes-like structures on them, and you can kind of see them here. So in other animals, the kidneys will look a little more smooth, but you can definitely tell in the cow that it has these more lobe-like structures on it. And you can see there's a lot of fat. All this white stuff around here around the kidney is actually fat that's accumulated here. The kidneys lie in an area called the retroperitoneal region of the abdomen. It's a little bit more towards the dorsal side, the top of the animal, more towards the vertebrae. But you can really see how there's really distinguished lobes, and so these are a little bit different than what you might see in a human or maybe a pig, which is a little bit more smooth, and they don't have these real distinguished lobes. But the kidneys will help form the urine, and the urine can then enter into the ureters. There's 2 ureters here, one for each kidney, and the urine can then go from the ureter to the bladder, and then can exit through the urethra to the outside of the animal during urination. Well, I just want to say thank you for joining us today and to take a look at some of these really neat animal anatomical structures. We look forward to seeing you around the Brim Animal Sciences building and maybe even ANSC 220. Thanks, everybody.